tonight's event is Organizing for Latinx Power and What's Next Under a Biden Administration. So if we can go to the agenda slide. I see your question, Leticia. We're going to talk a little bit about that. This is really just an event to be able to share with you all a little bit about Mihente, who we are, what our work and history is, how we're seeing this political moment, the work that we're doing organizing under a Biden administration, particularly around immigration, and also some of the work that we're doing at the local level and experimenting with electoral organizing and politics. So we're gonna do big picture, zoom out, talk about Mihenta as a whole, some national work, as well as zooming in a little bit to some examples of the local organizing. And we're gonna be hearing from three folks today. I'm gonna be helping to move us along in the conversation, but we're gonna be hearing from Migente co-founder and director, Marisa Franco, to ground us a little bit about about who Migente is, why we got started, and how we're understanding this political moment. We're then going to hear from our senior campaign organizer, Jacinta González, to share a little bit about our work organizing under the Obama administration for immigrant and migrant justice. And also hearing from council member Lane Santa Cruz, who's also a Mihente member, talking about her work as an elected official in Tucson and delivering local wins and victories and organizing fights. So again, for folks that are just joining, welcome. Please share your name, where you're calling from, and your pronouns in the chat. This will be an opportunity to just really hear from us, get a little bit of the updates, the download, and we'll take some questions and hear from y'all towards the end so that you can, ask some questions from our panelists. A special shout out to all of you for being here tonight or this afternoon. Huge thanks to Marisa, Jacinta, and Lane for joining us. Huge thanks to Alicia, our coworker who's helped put this together, and huge thanks to our coworker Irma, who's holding down some of the tech and support there. So that's what you can expect tonight. If that's not what you were hoping to hear, you might be in the wrong Zoom, but hopefully you're in the right place. So first we're gonna hear from our dear friend and National Director of Migente, Marisa Franco. So Marisa, hi, welcome. Thanks for being here. If you want to just introduce yourself, say hi to folks. But my first question to you is, why does Mihente exist?
Hey, Salam. Hey, everybody. Marisa here. I'm connecting from Phoenix, Arizona. Mihente exists and it's just crossing over 5 years since we launched in 2015. And part of the reason that we created Mihente was that we saw that there was this, Latinx people are one of the fastest growing populations in the United States. We are among the youngest at 27 years old, average age. And I think only a simple cursory look at the trajectory of the history of the United States shows us that any push, any advances in the right direction, bending the moral arc towards justice is met with virulent backlash. And that's as American as apple pie. And when we started Mihente, what we saw and what we talked about was demographic, social and cultural change in the United States was going to be met with that type of backlash, and that Latinx people would have a target on our backs. And we did not and do not, I think, still have a sufficient infrastructure, people power, fight back capacity from the bottom up to be able to defend ourselves. And we must do that. We must build that through many different forms and through many different strategies. So Mihente was really created to be a place to help both, like we say, vamos a dar la cara, we're gonna show our face and take on the fights that we need to take on, but also build organizing infrastructure from a grassroots level to an online digital communications level. And that's what we've been dedicated to doing over the last 5 years, building Political Home, a membership organization for Latinx people, and contesting for power, be it through targeting corporations or government around policies, impacting elections, victories, running folks, mobilizing voters. And then third, also building, independent community-led efforts outside of government to actually make things happen autonomously in our own community. So those are some of the ways that we've done that. And that's why we exist. Thanks everybody for joining tonight.
Thank you, Marisa. And to go a little bit deeper into one aspect of our work, right? So we at Mihente, we think about multiple strategies, multiple tactics to build power and in organizing our communities. But something that's a little bit newer to us, and one of the reasons we wanted to start Migente was to be able to have our way into the electoral world and electoral organizing. And so could you talk to us a little bit about why did we decide to participate in electoral politics, either from the beginning or in this last year, and what have we been able to win?
So a lot of us, not all of us, but a lot of us come out of the bullhorn side of politics and not the ballot side. I would count myself amongst those people. But one of the things that was really important to us when we started Mihente was that the idea that we should not be loyal to a particular strategy or to a particular tactic, and that we should be loyal to our mission and to our goals and what we're trying to do. And with that, what would it look like to contest power on all fronts? And sometimes I just, we say in Spanish, carrilla, but sometimes like a little fun of US activists and organizers and people who know better. This is just some of our chauvinism that like you'll always get into. I don't know how many of y'all consider yourselves activists or organizers or people doing good things in the world. And I would imagine most of us have had the experience where you go to a meeting, everybody's like, rah, 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 and then you start having the conversation, what are we gonna do together? And then inevitably there's a person that's like always talking about voter registration. And then there's that person that's always talking about community gardens, and that you can't trust the government. And then the meeting falls apart, at some point, and then everybody just takes their toys and goes home. And it's just like, we don't have time for that. And so we've talked about, and what we've tried to do is to say, hey, if there was a silver bullet, we would have won already. And what would it look like if like, yo, if that's your part, go do that part, go do this part, go do that part. With that said, it's undeniable that we needed a whole lot of focus and a whole lot of movement to make 45 a one-term president. And so, we've done different stuff over the years, but last year, culminating with the Fuera Trump campaign, we focused on 3 states, Georgia, North Carolina, and Arizona, focused on mobilizing voters there. In Georgia, obviously that carried us into the Senate runoff race. Obviously, you all can imagine, very complicated with COVID, but we were able to reach over 1 million people in person. We reached out to over 1 million people knocking on their doors, reached millions more over social media. And then in the Georgia election, had this really, I'm biased, but dope goal to knock every Latino door in that runoff, and we did it. There are tremendous partners in Georgia that have been organizing for a really long time. And there was a door knocking army for that runoff. So people immediately pivoted from not only flipping Georgia towards Biden, but actually winning the sheriff's races in 2 counties that had been, the sheriffs have been particularly anti-immigrant. And so those are some of the things that we did. There's more to say about Fuera Trump. There was, a complete kind of cultural strategy and a communication strategy that we ran. But in terms of the 3 states, and just to kind of quickly say why those 3 states now, it seems kind of smart. But we believe that we can win in red states. And Mihenta from day one has always believed in people who live in the places that are often seen as political flyover states. And there is a whole lot that we can do in states like Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina, and are looking to expand that in the Southwest and the Southeast in particular over the next several election cycles.
Thank you, Marisa. So I'm gonna sort of fold two questions into one. So part one is, coming out of the last 4 years, it was rough, very rough to say the least. And some of us are still in a haze, some of us are celebrating, and some of us are pivoting and trying to figure out what this moment is. So could you give us a little bit of your take in what this political moment is and how we're situating ourselves and how we can kind of understand it? And within that context, what are Mijente's priorities for the next year or two moving forward?
I will try to be as concise as possible. A reshuffled political deck, in which oftentimes the reality is that our certain muscles get atrophied when we have a particular administration. This happened after Obama, and it's happening now with Trump. There is a reshuffled political deck, meaning things that we couldn't do before, now we kind of can maybe try to do. But we haven't been doing those things for a long time. And so it's kind of like smelling salts, like, we need to move. And people are tired. So it's just like this, there's a little bit of that feeling, I think, that's permeating across movements. Same urgency, but a very big backlash. I think none of us would say, oh, Trump got voted out, we're good. I think that there is a real, we must take note. We must take note about the threat of the organizing that's happening in the right wing. And so and then I think the other side of it is that there was a pretty significant united front to vote Trump out. And that was a very fractious, it obviously is a very fractious front. It's a fractious alliance that once that goal was met, there's significant variance about which way do we go forward. And there's a lot of positioning of the stories, positioning of the solutions, and positioning then of which way we go forward. And I would say like where I think, I mean, obviously I fall on a certain side of that, and I think Mihenta does as well. But I think the one thing is like, it was really impressive what we were all able to pull off as a movement. There's not any one strategy or any one group that can really take credit for what we were able to pull off amidst so much loss and so much uncertainty and fatigue last year. But I hope that we can agree that even though we saw such a resounding response from the electorate to vote out Donald Trump, we also need to see the weak points, how different communities don't actually identify as progressive, how people aren't being reached all the time by our movements and our organizations. And I think that speaks to Mijente's priorities of really strengthening our organizing muscles and trying to reach people who maybe aren't the folks who have already, kind of already, singing, what's that saying, the preaching to the choir. And so for us, I think it's really muscling up our organizing program, our education program. And the last thing I'll say is really kind of going beyond policy and just, there always feels like, and I think this is what people get, I would say working class people get in a progressive movement of like, when we win this, we can do all these things. But then in the meantime, like, what are we doing? And I think that's incumbent for organizations and movements to really look at, how are we showing up right now? How are we actually being a literal alternative to folks that are really trying to figure out how they're going to get through all of this? And so this year really like building up in the spirit of the reshuffled political deck, I think taking some time to build up our organization and make sure our people are okay, charting out a plan for the next several years, muscling up our organizing and education arm, and shooting our shot when we got it, which I think Jacinta is the resident expert on that. So I'll close there.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Marisa. I really appreciate you. And yeah, just a friendly reminder, if folks want to ask some questions, you can use the Q&A option at the bottom, and we'll try to take as many as possible towards the end. So I'm gonna pass it on to my dear friend and coworker Jacinta González, who is a senior campaign organizer with us at Migente, who's going to share a little bit about our work under the Biden administration and our Eyes on ICE demands and work. So I'll pass it to you, Jacinta.
Awesome. Thank you, Salem. And thanks everyone for being here. Really excited to be part of this conversation and just get a chance to connect and give updates. I know sometimes the work gets really hectic. It's hard to follow up on all the emails. So just really appreciate a chance to be in conversation with everyone. As Salem said, I'm a senior campaign organizer with Migente, which means I get to do a lot of the campaign work, particularly the immigration work that Mihente is a part of and has been really exciting in the last couple of weeks. So I'll just say one, under Trump, the situation around immigration was really horrible. The administration made it no secret that the cruelty was the point of their policies. They, caged so many of our community members, so many deportations, really let ICE go unhinged in a lot of ways, right? Retaliating against community members, locking up folks for long periods of time, expanding their capacity to cause harm in communities. And so when, the election happened and, we were able to get Trump out of office, obviously folks were very excited, were relieved, but there was also a moment of figuring out what can we win with a new administration? I think Biden definitely ran on a platform of I'm not Trump. And we knew that wasn't enough for our communities, right? For our communities to actually have safety, for our communities to actually have dignity, to be able to actually stop ICE, to stop deportations, close down detention centers. We were going to need much more from a new administration. And so that's why from the beginning, we were very clear. We were not trying to elect our savior. We were trying to elect our next target, right? And we were trying to create more space and more momentum for grassroots communities to be able to do what they do best, which is fight, right? To be able to bring home the wins and bring home the organizing victories. So for us, when we had a new target, when Biden was in office, immigration was a pretty logical place to start to see what we could win. A lot of us that are part of Mihenta now have been fighting deportations for a while. I can personally say I've gotten the pleasure of being able to fight under 4 different presidents, from Bush to Obama to Trump and now Biden. And so there was a lot of outstanding demands that our communities had been fighting. There's a lot of programs that build off of police collaboration with ICE, like 287G and secure communities. There's a lot of detention centers, particularly in the Southwest and the Southeast, that have been built up to hold our community members. There's programs like secure community, Operation Streamline and the prosecution of migrants that have been happening that we knew were kind of on the table. And we've been fighting these through the Not One More Deportation campaign before Migente was Migente. We fought these under Trump during the Chinga la Migra tour, where we went city by city talking about why we had to abolish ICE. We've done it through our No Tech for ICE campaign, where we've called out the tech and data companies that are helping build up ICE's infrastructure for deportations. And so, again, when we had Biden, we thought, well, what are we going to do? How are we going to fight back? And so what we did in the first 100 days is we launched a little, we call it an organizing sprint, right? We just kind of ran for a couple of months. And we called it Eyes on ICE, Truth and Accountability Forums. And in 2 months, we held over 30 events. Some events were national events, some events were hosted by local organizations. And we heard from over 150 testimonies of folks that have been directly impacted by deportation, directly impacted by detention, folks who have been, might be detained right now, folks who have been released, folks who have been deported, and organizers who are on the front lines of a lot of these fights, talking about what were the expectations for the new administration and what were the policy solutions that we already knew, right? Again, that we didn't want to just say it's not enough to just not be Trump. You actually have to go farther to actually dismantle a lot of this infrastructure that has been able to create so much harm in our communities. And so we held all of these events and put out a public call, a public invitation to the new Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, Secretary Mayorkas, to come and publicly talk to a lot of these organizers. And so they accepted the invitation, but have not scheduled the meeting yet. But in that time, we have been able to actually take a lot of the same people that were testifying, that were giving their stories in the Truth and Accountability forums, to directly have the opportunity to meet with high up officials that I can't name, but I hope you can guess, within the Department of Homeland Security around what are these priorities. And one fight that has really sort of surfaced as a key fight to have right now is that ICE and Border Patrol are right now working on their enforcement guidelines. And what these are really rules for ICE agents in terms of how they're supposed to act in the field, in terms of how they conduct arrests, who they arrest, who they detain, for who long, how to stop deportations. So these are really fundamental guidelines that can protect organizers from retaliation, that can give organizers a tool to stop a deportation, that can also give attorneys and community advocates ways of emptying out detention centers to then be able to close them down. And we've really sort of spotlighted that this is a place for fight. So in the next couple of weeks, we're going to continue these meetings with the Department of Homeland Security, but we're also starting to build up a bench of organizers that will use these tools to be able to fight deportations and close down detention centers. And so we're kind of in this place where, one, it's been really important and powerful to see folks that have this experience, that have been targeted by ICE, that have, you know, long-term experiences with the criminal legal system, who have been incarcerated for many years, speaking directly to the officials that are drafting these rules in a way that has been really, really moving in terms of changing the conversation. You know, the temporary guidelines that this administration have talk about needing to prioritize people based on public safety, which really just means that they're giving ICE agents power to go after people. And so we've actually gotten them to engage in what it would look like to change that framework, to have a different way of talking about these things that would hopefully, right, when there's a final memo, help actually stop more deportations and help reduce detention numbers so that we're able to close down a lot of these centers, as well as figuring out a more humanitarian response to folks that are seeking asylum at the border. So that's the work that we're engaged in right now. We're going to continue to fight. So you'll probably see a lot of things from us in terms of both, one, opportunities for organizers to plug in, to skill up, to learn about the history of these things. We're going to have a couple of webinars just in the next couple of weeks talking about this long history of organizing, and also talking about what are deportation cases that people are fighting against right now, and what does that tell us about the political moment. But we're also going to have opportunities for you to call the Department of Homeland Security yourself, right? And let them know what you think. There'll be a lot of opportunities to support organizers coming together to get these trainings to continue to fight, and also continue to uplift the folks of grassroots organizations that are on the front lines taking on all of these cases every day. So hopefully folks will want to continue to plug into all of this. Again, watch out for the invitations for these webinars just as a starting point. We're going to continue pushing the policies, continue having these meetings with officials at DHS, and we'll continue to report back as we're winning. But it's been really exciting to be able to see both, you know, organizing that has been going on for, you know, decades now, combined with electoral organizing, combined with grassroots fights, combined with policy options, to come together to be able to chip away at the way that ICE has been causing all of this harm in communities. So that's kind of the report back. Happy to answer any questions, hear thoughts. Let me know if you have questions about how to continue to plug in. But it's just been it's an exciting moment, and really excited to share that with everybody here today. So I'll pass it back over to you, Salah.
Thank you, Jacinta. Excellent. So, you know, we're getting a lot of big picture stuff, and the fights that we're engaging in national levels, and we also are grounded in local fights and local organizing and local conditions. So I wanna turn over to you, Lane. Thank you for joining us, and hear a little bit more about your work, and specifically if you could share a little bit with us about why you decided to run for city council in Tucson, and what were some of the issues that you were spearheading and put forth in your campaign?
Salem. Hi, everybody that's on this call. Thank you so much for the invitation to be in conversation with all of you today. I'm Lane Santa Cruz. I'm serving my first term in office. I'm a year and a half in. I want to acknowledge that, Tucson rests in Tohono O'odham lands here in Southern Arizona. And, they're the original caretakers of this land. And we continue to experience a lot of, those original fights when it comes to land and access to like economic wealth and all the list of, things that we really care about. So I just wanted to acknowledge them. Also, we like celebrate Dia de San Juan here. It's the Catholic version, but it is when folks in this community, because we do live in a desert community, come out to pray, for rain. And just acknowledge that, water is sacred and it's life here, especially in the conditions of the Sonoran Desert. So I was born and raised here in Tucson. My parents migrated from Tarahumara lands in Chihuahua and from El de Opata Pueblos in Sonora to Tucson in their early 20s. So, I'm a product of this place. I'm very thankful to be able to connect with the work that Mihente does, because I'm like hyper localized in like my work and my struggle, and being a part of this network helps me connect those issues at a broader scale, but also like where we need to move, and how we need to navigate this political moment. So growing up, we learn a lot about like government, but mostly history and mostly about the federal government. We don't really touch on like the city councils and like state government and how they're making decisions and policy moves every single day that impact us, whether it comes to like the conditions of our roads, our parks, public safety, all the way, to the state level, which is like childcare and like food assistance and like economic and workforce development. And so I remember just being very disconnected and not really understanding how that worked. And like many of us, right, I got politicized in college and began, to understand the dynamics of power and control in our country, and naming a lot of our experiences as like marginalized communities, and that you end up having communities that don't hold any power, blaming themselves, for their own failure in a power play that was never meant, for them to win. And so I remember that, seeing that in my own family, in my own community. But my trajectory was always to work, within academia and do, be like an academic activist, even though my work was always grounded in community. But I have my PhD in education, and when I defended my older brother, that was the last time I saw him. He passed a couple weeks later from an accidental fentanyl overdose. And it was just, a moment that really shook my family and myself about like, what am I doing? What are we doing? How do we continue to like fail, our community around so many different issues, especially around trauma and mental health. So I feel like that like really shifted my focus, and getting back to, just like local politics, and trying to do my, put my granito de arena in that space. And like a lot of people that run for office, especially, femmes of color, it's like you're tienes coraje, you're angry about seeing that things, like stay the same. I'm in a city that's like, all, it's all democratic. It's seen very progressive, but a lot of these like policy moves that really impact families, like nobody's bringing them up. So I ran for office because I saw a lot of those disconnections around folks that are disenfranchised and disengaged from local government, and making sure that we were centering those voices, those experiences in our policy making. So, some of the focus areas that I ran on was around, transportation and mobility, and making sure that like we have a transit network that works for people and gets people to where they need to go on time. A lot of our folks, here in the city we have large undocumented community here too, and they do ride bikes, to get around, to get to jobs. But we have, no infrastructure. We over criminalize them if they're riding on their sidewalks. So, just wanting to highlight some of those issues and like invest. We also, my district is divided by, the interstate, part of that racist legacy of where, we put highways. So we don't have very good planning and investment west of that. So amplifying that, making sure that, as so many communities across the country, dealing with gentrification and displacement, making sure that we're supporting policies, for multi-generational housing and, our families caring for elders and young people, and making sure that neighborhoods, like people who'd been in neighborhoods for a long time, we're leading the discussion about the disinvestment that happened and the kinds of investments that they wanted to see and support. Also, with that, with our small businesses, we have so many like legacy owned businesses in my district, from like panaderias, carnicerias, to like people who like, fix, like shoes and tortillerias, just everything also that's like a cultural anchor in this community. But they have never had access to like capital or just, city regulations or licensing. And so really helping be a bridge for that. And then finally, having grown up here as a young person, just like really investing in our young people, making sure that their job options aren't just fast food or telemarketing, getting them engaged in government type of careers, but also as like the eyes and ears out in the community about the investments that need to happen. So those were, just some of the things that like propelled me to run, and those are like the guiding issues that we're pushing at this time.
Awesome. Thank you for that info. Thank you for your work and your leadership in your community. My next question is, what role does Mihente play in your work? And specifically, if you could talk a little bit about the exciting Ward 1 base building drive that y'all are doing.
Yeah. So, again, part of my past experience, I didn't mention, I worked as staff, for the council office that I now work at, early on in my early 20s. And so I saw like who had access to the office and who had, carried a lot of weight. And it was through neighborhood associations. Many of us know like the history of neighborhood associations comes from this framework of like crime watch, in the neighborhood. And so it's always like very alarmist and in my experience, very aggressive as well, and very much about more and more policing. When we were talking to people, on the ground or at the door, that was never their issue. Their issue was around like transportation issues, whether it's speeding, there's like no shade. My kid has to walk to school, to like, why don't we have a park, in this part of our community? Are you going to be one of those politicians that only come to our door when they're trying to get elected? Are you really going to do something? Are we going to see you, ongoing? So those were some of the things that really, like I've had to sit with about like, how are we reaching people who are disconnected, from their local government, as we are within the constraints of like dealing with neighborhood associations, but knowing that they don't necessarily, speak to like the broad issues that their community is facing. So, again, part of the support and my appreciation to Migente and these different strategies for how to engage with people. So again, it's not just at the time of like voting and trying to mobilize them, but those ongoing connections with them. We set out this summer to do a community engagement set on blind knocking on doors throughout the district. And so we're working on this goal of knocking on 10,000 doors by the end of the summer. And obviously, I represent over 95,000 people in the district, but 10,000 doors in the areas of the district that are most, disenfranchised and aren't as engaged, you know, in local government. And so we've been getting so much, you know, from those engagements, because we're also talking to people who don't vote, you know, or don't have any trust in government. And so it's just really shifting that we're not just waiting for them to come to us, that we're letting them know that we're here and these are the issues that we can address together, but also making a call from them that I can't do it alone, and that like, are they willing to also, you know, commit to a meeting or a cleanup or some form of engagement. And so that's, you know, just providing a lot of that support and training. A lot of, like, I'm in office, a lot of my staff is younger and haven't had that education of how do you navigate, you know, these like government bureaucracies. And so just, you know, providing even like professional development for my staff so that they can hold these two realities of like, how do we approach the work as organizers, while also how do we move, you know, within the bureaucracy of the city to make some of these things happen. So we've been, you know, working on that. And then the follow-up, like what's the follow-up with these folks that we've engaged, the leaders that we've identified, so that we can provide ongoing support. And the goal, aside from, you know, cleanups and other community meetings that need to happen, is having a neighborhood like leadership instituto, an institute to help, you know, build capacity for some of these leaders in our community and how to move things, you know, within the city and how we're here to support. And then we're going to do a whole other engagement piece around our small businesses as well. So I'm just, you know, thankful for Mihente playing such a pivotal role in helping us envision what engagement looks like, all centered around like co-governing. That was another, you know, that's like important framing for how we're approaching the work, that like, what does it mean to co-govern? And so once we get elected and are in office, we still, you know, we need that support, and we need to figure out what that looks like. So yeah, I'm just grateful to be able to learn and figure this out together with Mihente.
Thank you so much, Lane, for all of that. We're very excited to be co-governing, co-building, co-conspiring with you, for sure. So just a reminder to folks, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A. We're coming up close on time, but we're able to take a few. There was one that actually is for you, Lane, just to kind of keep you with us for a second, that I think is interesting if you do have this information. So it's someone asked, who were your supporters in electing you? And I would ask, like, was there anything that you learned by talking to folks, like things that surprised you or exciting or unexpected in terms of like who showed out for you?
So thankfully, the person who held this seat before is now the mayor for the city of Tucson. When she got elected to this seat, she was the first, you know, mujer Latina ever to hold this seat. And so for her, it was really important that like she was the first and she shouldn't be the last. And how do we, you know, continue to make it accessible for somebody like myself to run? And then she became the first woman, you know, mayor for the city of Tucson this past election. So that support was important. Some of the infrastructure that she had built was important, but I also knew that I'm, you know, there's certain people that are groomed to run for office, and I knew that I was not one of them. I'm a little more rough around the edges, and I wanted to own that. I didn't want to feel like being in this position meant that I had to talk a certain way or dress a certain way. I wanted to show up with all the, you know, all the complexities of all the different identities that we carry. So for me, it was helpful too to have Carlos Garcia, you know, in Phoenix, also running for city council at that time, to really like push and challenge me about how we can run campaigns, even at the campaign level, that looks different and really speaks, you know, to the folks in our community that we want to reach. And so having that mentorship, that encouragement just really allowed me to just show up during the campaign and making sure that like my lit, everything from my lit to my messaging, all of that was, you know, for me, that was like culturally relevant and accessible for folks in our community. And then, yeah, it's just, people showed up, you know, people showed up, and I'm like eternally grateful, and feel like I owe so much to them. And that's kind of like the humility with which like I'm reminded to show up for this work, because a lot of people put a lot of their own, you know, sweat and time and energy to get us here. And I want to make sure that I never forget that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lane. Appreciate you. And I see a lot of different questions coming in, and we're not going to have time for all of them, but we'll follow up with this recording and a survey. But I have a question for you, Marisa. Two-part question. See if there's connections you can make there. But one of them was asked around, you know, we hear a lot about the Latino vote. Who turned out for Trump? Latinos actually turned out in bigger numbers for Trump. Latinos are this voting bloc. We hear a lot about our communities in this as if we're a monolith, as if we're one and the same. And so the first part of the question is like, can you speak a little bit about how we understand our communities as not a monolith? What does that look like at Mihente? How do we approach that? And then I'll hold there actually, because part two is maybe a little bit separate.
Yeah, definitely not a monolith. I think we saw that in this last election. You know, we saw what happened in Florida and we saw what happened in South Texas, but we also saw what happened in Arizona. And Latinos had something to say on all sides. And I think that was really kind of punctuated this year. I think there's what we've talked about, and like we've said from the beginning, like we ignore Latinx people to our detriment as a progressive movement. It is an assumption, it's a fallacy that Latinx people will just automatically become part of this new majority and are going to vote, and one, and two, vote the right way if we're talking about electoral politics. As Lane was talking about, the message we get over and over again, not just as like Latinx, but like in many different ways and many different identities in this country, is like, don't worry about it. Someone else is going to handle that. And or your situation is your own fault. And there's not any other plays that were made over your head that created this. And so it's just a lot to get through. And I think that's why for us, organization is so important, and really reaching people and engaging people through many different forms. And so that's why some of the work that Lane was talking about with respect to the neighborhood associations and going directly to people's doors is so important, because a lot of people don't necessarily get reached. And so we need to be able to try different strategies and methods to engage them, and have those touches.
And then my other question is, the other question that we saw, and then I have one for you, Jacinta, is, so, you know, Mihenta is a movement building organization, and there's work that we spearhead, sometimes there's work that we flank, but we ultimately believe in building many organizations, many Mihentes, and building cross movement. What would you say is Mijenta's approach? How are we building this progressive ecosystem? How do we collaborate with other movement organizations? And how are we building across issues and across movements, across organizations?
That's for me, or you said Jacinta? I'm sorry.
All right, for you, Marisa.
Why am I don't know why you're talking about, I thought I misunderstood, my bad. How are we doing that? Yeah, I mean, I think it's just in the ground level of Mihente. We talked about building a Latinx organization that's not just that traditional kind of old framework of just for the advancement of Latinos. That what we said from the very beginning is that it's not just about pro-Latinos, it's pro-Black, pro-LGBTQ, pro-Pachamama, pro-women, pro-Indigenous folks, because we are all of those communities. And it's really trying to kind of insert this idea that like, I'm just gonna get ahead. That's been told to Latinx people so much, and it's been so damaging to our community. It's a story that we have to it's a story we have to contest, and we need a different story. And so it's, you know, it has to do with how we do our work, who we ally with, Another example, our first endorsement as a Latino organization was Stacey Abrams when she ran for governor several years ago. Most Latino organizations are going to be looking for Latino candidates, and for us, it was like, no, that's not what it's about. We want to, and so the first 5 years of the organization has just been a lot of showing who we are and why we think we exist and why we need to do things different. And those are just some examples, but we really need to contest and change that mythology that the way you get ahead is just think of your number one, keep your head down and shut up and don't say nothing. That just hasn't helped our people. And I think we're seeing that over and over again in the politics, but not enough people are seeing what the alternative is.
Awesome. Thank you, Marisa. So Jacinta, I want to throw this to you to try to end us on a hopefully positive, inspiring note. What is some of the work that you feel most proud of from the last year? It could be the work that you spoke to earlier and that you're involved with, or just your own reflection on Mihente overall's work. And then we'll start to just close out.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say that one of the things that I think I feel pretty proud of is I think that, as soon as Biden got elected, a lot of the usual suspects sort of coming together in DC to be able to say this is the path forward on immigration, right? And so it was a lot of attorneys, it was a lot of policy folks, a lot of executive directors. And so to me, I think one of the things that was really powerful was having folks, again, who have been on the front lines of these fights, folks who have been organizing for years, folks who have been in these cages, who have had to confront ICE agents directly, be able to not only tell a cohesive story about what happened, but also be able to propose solutions and actually get into the room to be able to make those pushes and to actually be moving the dial in terms of how we're talking about folks who have been subjected to criminalization through the criminal legal system, through policing, through incarceration, actually speak directly to officials. I'll also say the folks at DHS were not very comfortable with this, right? They were actually very, very nervous. They were actually really, kind of upset, well, how is this gonna go? And so to actually have a crew that was really so cohesive and so strong in that was really exciting to just, we haven't won yet. We know that we won't win until we actually get a lot of these agencies to stop going after our people, until we actually stop all deportations. But we actually could see also a real shift in the conversation and where the markers were of what success was based off of work, but also based on people pushing right now. And I think there's also just a recognition of we wouldn't have been able to get here without folks pushing to get Trump out, without folks changing the Senate, without folks doing all of that. So again, I think just this combination of having those things go down in that way has been really, has just, I personally remember leaving some of those meetings and just feeling proud. I was like, whatever it was, we actually got the people together, said the thing that had to be said, didn't back down, we're actually strategic. And that just felt really good. It wasn't just a moment to kind of get on our soapbox and say what we said to be right, but actually trying to push an agenda. And it's an agenda that I know folks are committed to for the long haul too. So it felt good to see those relationships continue to deliver and continue to get us stronger.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jacinta. Okay, we have one more question and then we'll move into some closing and next steps. But it's from the compa Roberto Rodriguez around police killings, police violence, police brutality, and how at Migente we're joining in on that fight. So I'm gonna pass it over to Marisa to share a little bit with us.
Saludos, Dr. Cindy. Just wanted to make sure to respond to you, and we should just touch base directly. Is definitely something that we are looking to get more involved in. A lot of the work we've done historically is been with the intersection of immigration, and we're actually looking very explicitly to start building out an organizing program related to police violence, police killings of Latinx folks. So right now we're finishing a pretty robust research because last year what we saw is that Latinx people, by and large, when polled, had pretty low support for demands like defunding the police. And that really told us we needed to better understand why people have that perspective. So we've done over 20 focus groups, different regions, different communities inside of the broader Latinx community, getting people's perspectives, and finishing up a YouGov survey, and are going to be pulling that together to help both inform demands, supporting electeds like Carlos and Lane as they try to take on local fights related to bloated police budgets. So definitely would love to connect with you on this because you're such an expert and we have a lot of respect for your work around this issue.
Thank you so much, Marisa. And thank you to everyone who spoke tonight, Marisa, Lane, Jacinta, again, our compa and coworker Alicia for putting this together, and Irma for holding it down on the tech. And thank you all for joining us this evening or afternoon, depending on where you're at. And hopefully, you know, you're leaving with a little bit more information than you had before. We're certainly excited to be connected to you all